Welcome to this house of friendship and love. We come with our questions, our cares, our joys, our sorrows, and our yearnings. Welcome to this house of the Spirit. This is our sacred ground. Please join me in responsive opening words number 411 in your hymnal. Oh, 441. Sorry, 441. It's called To Worship. To worship is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars, before a flower, a leaf in sunshine, or a grain of sand. To worship is to be silent, receptive, before a tree astir with the wind, or the passing shadow of a cloud. To worship is to work with dedication and with skill. It is to pause from work and listen to a strain of music. To worship is to sing the singing beauty of the earth. It is to listen through a storm to the still small voice within. To worship is a loneliness seeking communion. It is a thirsty land crying out for rain. To worship is kindred fire within our hearts. It moves through deeds of kindness and through acts of love. Worship is the mystery within us, reaching out to the mystery beyond. It is an inarticulate silence, yearning to speak. It is the window of the moment, opening to sky eternal. Let us light our chalice today for the spirit of community that brings us together. I chose the first hymn as a song reminder of the community spirit that we share. Please turn to 346 in your hymnal. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home, where hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and smoke in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home, where hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and blow in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home, when hope is hard to find. share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. And I might know you mine. When I bring you home, when hope is hard to find, and all the song of love and rose in the winter time. This is our time for announcements of the community. Are there any announcements from the floor? Yes.
Just the usual announcement about Course of Miracles, which continues every Friday from 9 to 10 a.m. Our leaders for Course of Miracles, which will give you an education, perhaps unlike most of those, into spiritual matters, psychological matters. It's Richard Trudeau at Gaslight, many places. Al Rujo, down is our MC, and Dave was here earlier, is also on. I'd like to welcome you all to that. It's on Zoom, we can get the coordinates here.
So the UIA is hosting its listening sessions around the city, and we're hoping that people here can join us after service next week. Bring your concerns and your issues to us. We're going to collect this community's input, and then go through a grand listening assembly, they call it, where you try to whittle down all of the different issues that people brought to our attention, down to one or two that we focus on for the upcoming year. This being an election year, locally at least, we usually get a better response from the politicians. So please join us next week.
I want to say thank you so much, Ken, for being with us this morning. We so appreciate all the wonderful wisdom you shared with us over this spiritual year, and I will be in touch with you about next.
Thank you.
In a few months. I wanted to also let everyone know that Bridget is going to be leading our worship next. Our own Bridget is going to be leading our worship next week. So then, Bridget, can you go to us? I think you know your title, Bridget.
It's the lost political message of Palm Sunday.
Oh,
Lost political
I'm
message
here.
of Palm Sunday.
I'm here. Thank you. And I also wanted to mention, I wanted to mention that I need 5 to 10 minutes of the worship committee's time, as well as the standing committee's time, after service this morning, please. Thank you.
You may remember that last week we had trouble with our parking lot full of cars from the church next door. We complained to them, and we got a very nice letter of apology. They had a memorial service right before the regular service. So there were a lot of people from out of town. And the person who normally would have been out there preventing people from parking in the lot had health problems and wasn't there. So it's just lovely. Anyway, it was a nice letter, so you don't have to glare.
I can just yell, but just musical challenge. Every piece I was here today has the word good in the title. See if you can figure it out. A good man is hard to
And of course, I have one announcement. Don't forget, Thursday, opening day, Red Sox season begins.
Any more? And I have one announcement that our next element of worship is actually to go inwards in the spirit of prayer and meditation. So let us do it. Let us go inwards and bring our attention to our hearts. Spirit of love and life, gracious God, known by many names, we open our hearts this morning to scan our world and hold in them the people of Ukraine in a seemingly endless struggle for freedom. We hold in our hearts also the people of this nation experiencing horrendous weather conditions in many areas, but especially recently in Mississippi. And now into the silence, let us speak the promptings of our own hearts, or just be. Amen. The reading is from the book, How Good Do We Have to Be? By Rabbi Harold Kushner. He wrote an alternative ending to the Garden of Eden story. This is it. He titled it, How the Story Might Have Ended. So the woman saw that the tree was good to eat from, and a delight to the eye. And the serpent said to her, Eat of it, for when you eat of it, you will be as wise as God. But the woman said, No, God has commanded us not to eat of it, and I will not disobey God. And God called to the man and the woman and said to them, Because you have hearkened to my word and not disobeyed my command, I shall reward you greatly. To the man he said, You will never have to work again. You will spend all your days in idle contentment, with food growing all around you. To the woman, he said, you will bear children without pain, and you will raise them without pain. They will need nothing from you. Your children will not cry when their parents die. To both of them, he said, for the rest of your lives, you will have full bellies and contented smiles. You will never cry and you will never laugh. You will never long for something you don't have. And the man and the woman grew old together in the garden, eating daily from the tree of life and having many children. And the grass grew high around the tree of knowledge of good and evil, until it disappeared from view, for there was no one to tend it. The title of the sermon is The Pursuit of Goodness. Do you consider yourself a good person? I firmly believe 3 things about the human condition. We are wired to long for love, and yet we actually always have it. We are wired to long for goodness, and yet at the core, we are good. We absolutely need to forgive ourselves and others when we miss the mark, as in Judaism, or sin in Christianity. First, let us define goodness. What does it mean to be good? There were 15 definitions of good in my American Heritage Dictionary. Definition 14A is virtuous and upright, and 14B is benevolent and kind. What is implied is that if one is good, one is virtuous, upright, benevolent, and kind all the time. Perfect, in other words. 99.9% of human beings are intermittently good, not perfect. We can also extend this definition to society at large. Is society virtuous and benevolent, or is it greedy and uncaring? It is good sometimes and not others. And at times of great imbalance, such as now, we must struggle politically to balance the scales of social justice. Do you agree that we long for love and for goodness? Let us remind ourselves that these are my opinions for you to consider, not accept blindly. None of us has an edge on the truth. Rabbi Harold Kushner implies that our longing for love also affects how good we can be, or at least perceive our goodness. He says that our perception of how lovable and how good we are is conditioned by the teachings of our religion and is illustrated in the most famous stories of the Bible. We are born vulnerable in that, unlike animals, we are dependent upon our parents' consistent love and care for many years if we are to grow up with a strong sense of self and self-respect and safety. How can parents who are human and who are good intermittently offer us consistent love, especially when there is more than one child? I recall that one of my children constantly asked me whether I loved her or him more than the other. This is the fear of a lot of children, that the other child is loved more and there's not enough love to go around. Your brother or sister might say, "You were always mother's favorite." The mythical original parents of the human family, Adam and Eve, are a case in point, and so is the setting of their story in the Garden of Eden. Before we leave the subject of parenting, however, I just want to mention something that occurred, I think it was in the 70s, maybe early 80s, 1980s, when mothers were feeling, most women were out working now in the society rather than staying home with the children. I was one of them. And we were labeled mothers with latchkey kids. Oh, I have to tell you, my sister and I were latchkey kids and proud of it. Trusted with the key of the house and not to burn it down. Someone wrote a book called The Good Enough Parent. The Good Enough, I think it was really The Good Enough Mother, but we need to include our menfolk in that. The Good Enough Mother. And I want to tell you, you were a good enough mother, a good enough father. Not a perfect one. Some of us grew up in religions that taught us that the story of Adam and Eve was a story of human nature, which in Christian interpretation was to do evil, the belief being that we are bad at the core. How many of you grew up with that idea that we were bad at the core? Yeah, most of us. Through much of Western history, women were seen as the special perpetrators of evil, taking their cue from Eve, who presented the apple to Adam, thus losing perfection or innocence. As a result, God banished the pair from paradise. Adam is condemned to work for their food and to have great difficulty doing this, and Eve to experience pain in childbirth. Have to have some reason for that, eh? My own spiritual teachers have interpreted this story as humankind's choosing to separate from God, or the divine energy, or whatever you call the creation force. I want to tell you that I remember, I think it was a PBS program, and they were interviewing scholars from Oxford University. It was a religious program. And this fellow from Oxford said, women are the root of all evil, that they're the great temptresses, and they cannot help it. Of course, I felt like strangling him, right? As good as I am. Rabbi Kushner says, the story of the Garden of Eden is a tale, not of paradise lost, but of paradise outgrown, not of original sin, but of the birth of conscience. He said, Adam and Eve, eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as I see it, is a mythical description of how the first human beings left the world of animal existence behind and entered the problematic world of being human. His alternative story in the reading today shows how boring life would be in paradise. Even if we grew up without religion, our culture is permeated with this myth, especially the Christian interpretation of it. Kushner points out that Jews have always regarded sin as a deed and saw human beings as capable of atoning for their sin through repentance, which they do at their New Year, Yom Kippur. For the early Christians, sin became not a deed, but a condition, an ineradicable stain on the human soul. That's a crime against humanity. Unitarian Universalists regard human nature as being closer to that of the Jewish interpretation, good at the core. Kushner tells us that the Bible is replete with imperfect, flawed, famous characters who struggle with the self that they are. They are stuck with themselves, so to speak. We're all stuck with the self that we are. The story of King David is one of a wonderfully flawed character. And yet, he is the most beloved of God. So beloved that the Christian Bible, the New Testament, takes great pains to show that Jesus is descended from King David. Other biblical characters lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, like King David, famously with Bathsheba, and yet they redeem themselves. And this is the whole point. They are not alone, and they are held in love. Even though a modern day prophet might have to come by and remind them sometimes to shape up, as happens in our society, such as when a Bernie Sanders tries to awaken us to what a truly just government might be. It is an illusion that we are alone and without love. We long for love from other human beings because we feel so alone. Love is available to us in the universe. But unless we are one of the rare human beings who are already connected to the love channel of the universe, we need to have love manifest in human form. When the world lets us down, or perhaps we let ourselves down, what can we do to restore ourselves to goodness, to the core of who we truly are? We need a spiritual practice for this. We do, after all, want to lead a good life so that we can get to so-called heaven, and that requires that we have been good. You may have heard the story of a fellow who finds himself before St. Peter at the pearly gate. St. Peter explains that it's not so easy to get into heaven. He asks the man, "Were you generous and kind? Did you do good deeds, give money to the poor, help your neighbor?" The fellow replied that he couldn't remember doing any of these things. St. Peter, exasperated, said, "You must have done something good." "Well," said the fellow, "there was this old lady. I came out of a store and found her surrounded by a dozen hell's angels. They had taken her purse and were pushing her around. I got so mad, I threw my bags down, pushed my way through the crowd, and got her purse back. I helped her to her feet. Then I went up to the biggest, baddest biker and told him how despicable, cowardly, and mean he was. And then I spat in his face." "This is impressive," said St. Peter. "When did all of this take place?" "Oh, about 10 minutes ago." The point in all of this is to show that many of the stories in Judeo-Christian scripture are examples of life. Sibling rivalry exists. Parents favoring one child over another happens, even if it's intermittently. Jealousy happens. Estrangement between and among siblings happens. Emotionally wounded children can become emotionally wounded and limited parents. The woundedness, whether parent or child, brother or sister, affects our ability for goodness and for love. We hope that deeply wounded people seek a way to work through their woundedness, or at least we can have some empathy for them or for our own selves. A good parent won't be good all the time. We simply cannot keep it up, especially in a world with no extended family to help. Even so, most of us find ways to respond effectively to children most of the time. These are the good enough parents, good enough parents. And a few of us are outstandingly good. Notice I said a few. I recall reading in the Standard Times years ago of the homeless New Bedford woman with a baby who was in the lobby of the Standard Times. This is a true story. She was telling her story. In spite of having a job, she couldn't pay her rent and babysitting. Another woman overheard the story and told her she could come home with her and live in her mother's tiny apartment since her mother was now in a nursing home. Soon an editorial appeared about the Good Samaritan, and she was indeed good, and what a serendipitous meeting that was. But is she always good? The point of all these stories is that goodness does not mean perfection. The Bible stories tell us that goodness is found in human beings, but not perfection. However, are we to keep our minds upon the possibility of bringing more goodness or justice into the world? Today begins the 5th week of Lent. This is my Lent sermon. Holy Week begins next Sunday, called Palm Sunday. Lent gives us 40 days. You know, in the Bible, 40 is kind of the standard amount of time. Jesus goes into the desert, into the wilderness for 40 days. Moses goes up to the mountain and all of this. So have you ever felt that Lent was very long, overly long? It might feel that way because the Sundays in Lent are not counted in the 40 days. They're called the Sundays of Lent. We're supposed to put our minds on the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection. Lent is also a journey towards springtime, and historically there were many rites of spring to look forward to. If you look around the world, I see that, what's his name, Steve's, the guy who travels all over Europe, something Steve. What is it? Oh yeah, Rick Steves. He has a whole program on Easter throughout Europe, I think. Not just Europe, Turkey too. If you look around the world, yes, you'll see how the approach to Lent is so different. How many of you have ever participated in Lent traditions? Quite a few. Now, when I was a girl, I loved what we called Shrove Tuesday. This was the day before Ash Wednesday, which is the first day of Lent. It used to be a holiday where I come from. We would watch the television races in various villages in the area where women would race while tossing pancakes. It was a big pancake, an English or French looking one, big one. It was such fun that day. Our parents would make English pancakes. Our father did this that day. I realized that our father did it because my mother was Scottish. She was from Scotland, and she didn't know anything about this tradition and she grew up Catholic also. She didn't know anything about this tradition. That would have been a bit pagan to her. So these English pancakes, they're a bit like French pancakes, a little thicker than French pancakes. And they're served, you sprinkle sugar on them and squeeze lemon juice all over and roll it up and eat it. So delicious. So shrove comes from an English word, shrive, which means to absolve of sin. Because this is what you want to go into Lent, is to be absolved before that begins. This Shrove Tuesday is akin to Mardi Gras celebration. French words that mean Fat Tuesday. Did you know that? Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. Or the celebrating by eating fatty or rich foods before the restrictions of Lent. And going to New Orleans for this is very special, except that isn't just one day of Mardi Gras. I hope to do this in my lifetime. Shall we do it, Leo? Wake up. The 40 days of Lent are supposed to have us remember the 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness. Lent comes from the Anglo-Saxon word Lenten, meaning lengthen, and refers to the lengthening days of spring. I am certain that there were lots of spring rites before ever Christianity came into Europe. As we move towards Easter week, we are to reflect upon the meaning of Jesus' life and death, as well as on our own lives and how we're doing on the road to goodness. So Lent that's what it's about. It's about you to do an assessment of yourself, isn't it? It's rather a good tradition to make us more mindful as Easter and spring approach. Muslims will begin thinking of their time of Ramadan that began last week on the 22nd, when they will fast during the day and spend the day in prayer and reflection for 1 month. They're very similar, these two. And these two also very similar to Yom Kippur, to that week. Do these times of Lent for Christians and Ramadan for Muslims and reflective time in other religions benefit individuals spiritually and psychologically? Are the practitioners benefited in their goodness? Surely all religions hope that their practices and traditions help their people be reminded of their best selves. Are we our best selves when we try to live up to the lofty ideas in our principles? I believe the answer is yes. This is not to say that we'll be perfect, but we know we can't be perfect. The pursuit of goodness is not the pursuit of perfection. You know that the perfectionists in your lives might drive you and themselves up the wall. We can be good enough. I hope we have no doubt that the care of human beings is good. When we are supremely annoyed with our partners or children or friends, we would do well to remember their good care and to allow for others to redeem or restore themselves in some way, even by a simple apology. An apology is a powerful thing, a powerful thing. The complexity and stresses and strains of our lives can lead us away from the care of goodness. Our task is to keep coming back to that core, for in that core is love, grace, our own deep spiritual scent at the heart center. A spiritual practice can help us find the core when it is lost to our consciousness. You can find it by meditating, praying, dancing, singing, with the intent to recover it. May we ever think of ourselves as connected to a wholesome part of humanity and the universe, and may we ever call ourselves back to the core of who we truly are, which is good, not perfect, just good. Let the offering be received, generously given and received for the work of this church. Thank you. So let us sing our final hymn. Oh, excuse me. Oh, thank you, Richard. Joys and concerns, right? Yes, they're all important. Joys and concerns. So someone have a joy or a concern to share?
This is sort of a joy. It's like a pastoral education, of which I endured 2 quarters on the way to a doctor of ministry degree. We were taught to think of ourselves as good enough. And then because I was also a preacher's kid, I was good for nothing.
for the weekend. I was visiting my boys in their young children in Portland. My nephew and his son, one of my boys lives out of the country, so he wasn't there, but just in case. So we had a fabulous time. We sang Irish tunes, and we had Irish food, and we watched some play games. It was really lovely.
Eric got a message from Deborah.
I think it's been turned off.
Now,
Yes.
why do you hand me?
So nobody will listen.
He's imperfect.
Deborah has a new phone number, so if you've been trying to contact her, she would not have got your message. And she said, what else did she say, Eric?
She basically, all she said was that she's feeling a lot better and she's on the mend and she should be seeing us soon. That I can check.
And I have her phone number. If anyone wants.
I guess it's a combination of joy and concern. So the concern is that the overflow shelter, which houses an additional 35 people during the coldest months, is closing. But the joy is that the city did support them in their endeavor to having a drop-in center now, so that they're going to be able to help people, starting in April, so second, I think is Monday. Anyway, and so anyone who has any kind of like housing issue, some kind of, if they're living outside, hygiene concerns, they're gonna have showers, washers, they're gonna have computers so people can do job searches. It's really a step, really an improvement from what's been going on in the past years. So that's kind of a joy. But yeah, the concern is it's still getting cold out there, people die. It's unbelievable.
Okay, so let us sing our final hymn. It's Thanks Be for These, number 322, verses 1 through 4.
Play the tune through, it's not really a song.
Thanks be for these, my sorry times. Lord, the greatness of delight. Triumphant Savior, you turn wide, shaping our vision of the right. Thanks be for these, for birth and care. We celebrate life's eternal. Thanks be for these enrolling heart. Images from to our side. Music caressing, free and hard. The grace and love provide. Thanks be for these Christian life. Moses,
May we ever think of ourselves as connected to a wholesome part of humanity and the universe. And may we ever call ourselves back to the core of who we truly are, which is good or good enough. Amen.
Oh